This week, we mark the feasts of Saints Peter and Paul. Pope Benedict XVI celebrates 65 years of priesthood. Hello and welcome to this edition of Vatican Connections. Now, it's the last edition of the season and we've got a lot to get through, so let's get started. This week, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI celebrated his 65th anniversary of ordination to the priesthood. To mark the day, he returned to the Apostolic Palace for a special gathering with Pope Francis and the members of the Roman Curia. Catholic News Service has details on this anniversary celebration.
Lei, Santità, continua a servire la Chiesa. Non smette di contribuire veramente con vigore e sapienza alla sua crescita. E lo fa da quel piccolo monastero Mater Ecclesiae in Vaticano che si rivela in tal modo essere tutt'altro che uno di quegli angolini dimenticati nei quali la cultura dello scarto di oggi tende a relegare le persone quando con l'età le loro forze vengono meno.
Eucharistomen ci manda a quella realtà di ringraziamento, a quella nuova dimensione che Cristo ha dato. Lui ha trasformato in grazie, così in benedizione, la croce, la sofferenza, tutto il male del mondo e così fondamentalmente trassostanziato la vita, il mondo, e ci dato e dà ogni giorno il pane della vera vita che supera il mondo grazie alla forza del suo amore. Grazie soprattutto a lei, Santo Padre, la sua bontà dal primo momento della elezione, ogni momento della mia vita qui mi colpisce, mi porta realmente interiormente, più che i giardini vaticani con la bellezza che hanno. La sua bontà è il luogo dove abito, mi sento protetto.
La provvidenza ha voluto che lei, caro confratello, giungesse in un luogo per così dire propriamente francescano, dal quale promana una tranquillità, una pace, una forza, una fiducia, una maturità, una fede, una dedizione e una fedeltà che mi fanno tanto bene e danno tanto forza a me e a tutta la Chiesa.
Pope Francis has offered prayers for the victims of Tuesday's terrorist attack on Istanbul's Ataturk airport. While leading the Angelus on Wednesday, he said, "Yesterday evening in Istanbul, a heinous terrorist attack was made that has killed and wounded many people. Let us pray for the victims, their families, and for the dear Turkish people." Then he led the thousands of people in the square in the Hail Mary, and he prayed for the conversion of the hearts of terrorists. The Pan-Orthodox Synod in Crete has closed. The 10 participating patriarchs issued a final encyclical running through the items they discussed. Among other things, they say the autocephaly, or the autonomy of the particular Orthodox churches, cannot be put ahead of the universality and unity of the whole Orthodox Church. They add that because of this, creating episcopal conferences in countries where the Orthodox faithful live in diaspora is a good thing, and it helps foster this unity. Finally, in regards to dialogue with non-Orthodox Christians, they say dialogue is never a compromise, but a witness to the teachings of the Church Fathers and the genuine traditions of the Church. Pope Francis was in Armenia over the weekend. Now we'll be looking in depth into that visit coming up. But during the visit, he not only referred to the Armenian genocide, he also visited the genocide memorial. Now, we know the Turkish government objects to the use of the word genocide, and they are also quite unhappy that he visited the memorial. Turkish officials said the Pope has a crusader mentality, and they are expected to summon the Vatican nuncio to Turkey to officially express their objections over the Pope's choices of words. Last year, when Pope Francis used the term during the liturgy marking the 150th anniversary of that event, Turkey responded by actually recalling their ambassador to the Vatican. So we'll have to see if they do the same again. Now, on the return flight to Rome, Pope Francis told reporters that in Argentina, the killing of millions of Armenians at the hands of the Ottomans has always and only been referred to as a genocide. That's the only word he knew for it. Also, he pointed out that Pope John Paul II used the word genocide when referring to the same event. This week also brought the feasts of Saints Peter and Paul. That is a Vatican holiday and the day newly appointed metropolitan bishops received their pallium. This year, there were 25 metropolitan bishops receiving pallia, among them Bishop Bernard Hebda of St. Paul in Minneapolis. Now, in the past, the Pope would actually place the pallium on the bishops one by one, but Pope Francis has changed this. The metropolitan bishops are invited to attend the Mass, they receive the folded pallium from the Pope, but they take that back to their home diocese, and the papal nuncio actually bestows the pallium on the bishop at a Mass celebrated with the local church. Finally, the journey to full unity between the Catholic Church and the Society of Pius X has taken yet another unexpected turn. On Wednesday, Bishop Bernard Fillet, the Superior General of that society, released a statement on behalf of the Society's leadership. In the statement, he says Pope Francis has encouraged doctrinal errors instead of denouncing them. He says the Society is praying and doing penance for the Pope that he might have the strength to proclaim the Catholic faith and morals in their entirety. However, the statement did not specify what errors the Society believes Pope Francis is encouraging. Now, the Society of St. Pius X has been in talks with the Vatican in search for a way to reintegrate it and its members into the Catholic Church fully. Bishop Fillet actually met personally with Pope Francis back in April, and that seemed to signal that progress was being made. Talks with the group actually began under St. John Paul II and continued throughout the papacy of now retired Pope Benedict XVI. Pope Francis just wrapped a weekend visit to Armenia. Let's take a closer look at that trip. So, Pope Francis visited the Genocide Memorial in Armenia. He celebrated Mass with local Catholics, and he took part in a divine liturgy in the Armenian Apostolic Rite. Now, every visit begins with the arrival formalities, the greeting on the tarmac, the military honors, and the introduction to local officials. The official meeting, however, took place at the presidential palace. Pope Francis met with Armenian President Sirs Sargsyan privately and then addressed the country's civil authorities. There, the president praised the Holy Father for referring to the Armenian genocide as exactly that. And according to the English translation that journalists were given, the president said, "We don't look for culprits. We don't spread accusations." He said, "We simply want things to be called for what they are. We want things to be called by their names." Pope Francis told the president and government officials, sadly, that tragedy, that genocide, was the first of the deplorable series of catastrophes of the past century made possible by twisted racial, ideological, or religious aims that extended to planning the annihilation of entire peoples. The Pope said, unfortunately, the great international powers looked the other way. In this regard, it is vitally important that all those who declare their faith in God join forces to isolate those who use religion to promote war, oppression, and violent persecution, exploiting and manipulating the holy name of God, Pope Francis said. Now, the next day, the Pope visited the Genocide Memorial. Catholic News Service has more.
Quella tragedia, quel genocidio, inaugurò purtroppo il triste elenco delle immani catastrofi del secolo scorso, rese possibili da aberranti motivazioni razziali, ideologiche o religiose che otteneranno la mente dei carnefici fino al punto di prefiggere l'intento di annientare interi popoli. Condividiamo con grande gioia i tanti passi di un cammino comune già molto avanzato e guardiamo davvero con fiducia al giorno in cui, con l'aiuto di Dio, saremo uniti presso l'altare del sacrificio di Cristo, nella pienezza della comunione eucaristica. Ed ora, Santità, in nome di Dio, vi chiedo di benedirmi, di benedire me e la Chiesa Cattolica, di benedire questa nostra corsa verso la piena unità.
The Pope went on to celebrate Mass at Vartanants Square with the local Roman Catholic community, and he ended the day taking part in an ecumenical meeting and prayer for peace. So he and the Armenian Apostolic Catholicos, Karakin II, led the prayer portion of that gathering. Pope Francis was presented with a replica of Noah's Ark, which is believed to have come to rest on Mount Ararat, which actually overlooks Gyumri, the city where this event was being held. The replica was filled with a tree whose roots were covered with soil from different parts of Armenia and places where Armenians live in diaspora. Pope Francis and Catholicos Karakin II then watered the tree together as a sign of unity. On Sunday, Pope Francis attended and participated in a divine liturgy celebrated by Catholicos Karakin II in the Armenian Apostolic Rite. Because the Catholic and Armenian churches are not in full union, Pope Francis sat in a place of honor. He followed along with the Missal and did not receive the Eucharist. In his homily, Catholicos Karakin told his faithful and his guests, "During these days together with our spiritual brother Pope Francis, with joint visits and prayers, we reconfirmed that the Holy Church of Christ is one in the spreading of the gospel of Christ in the world, in taking care of creation, standing against common problems, and in the vital mission of the salvation of man. All Christians," he said, "share the mission of the strengthening of solidarity among nations and peoples and the reinforcing of brotherhood and collaboration." Now, Pope Francis was invited to address the gathering like the same way that Catholicos Karakin spoke at Pope Francis's Mass in Gumri the day before. Now, Pope Francis said, "We have met, we have embraced as brothers, we have prayed together and shared the gifts, hopes, and concerns of the Church of Christ." And using the words from St. Gregory of Narek, a 10th century Armenian monk who was actually declared a doctor of the Church by Pope Francis last year, he prayed that the Holy Spirit would dissolve the scandal of Christian division with the power of love. Christian unity is not and cannot be about the submission of one to the other or assimilation, the Pope said, but rather should be an acceptance of the different gifts of God has given to different Christians at different times. And before heading out to the Corvirap Monastery for one final visit before catching his return flight, Pope Francis and Catholicos Karakin II signed a joint declaration. In that declaration, they said, "We gladly confirm that despite continuing divisions among Christians, we have come to realize more clearly that what unites us is much more than what divides us. This is the solid basis upon which the unity of Christ's Church will be made manifest in accordance with the Lord's words, that they may all be one." And the declaration went on to say that the relationship between the two churches has entered a new phase, and they are both convinced of the need to further that relationship. Then there was a quick stop at the Corvirap Monastery, where St. Gregory the Illuminator was imprisoned for 13 years. That was just before Pope Francis arrived at the airport and boarded his flight to Rome. On board the flight, he held an hour-long press conference with journalists. Here is one part of that conference.
Io credo che la Chiesa non solo deve chiedere scusa, come ha detto quel cardinale marxista, non solo deve chiedere scusa a questa persona che è gay, che ha offeso, ma deve chiedere scusa ai poveri anche, alle donne sfruttate, ai bambini sfruttati del lavoro. Deve chiedere scusa di aver benedetto tante armi. La Chiesa deve chiedere scusa di non aversi comportato tante volte, quando dico la Chiesa diciamo i cristiani, la Chiesa è santa, i peccatori siamo noi. I cristiani dobbiamo chiedere scusa di non aver accompagnato tante scelte, tante famiglie. I cristiani dobbiamo chiedere tante scuse, non solo su questo, perdono, non solo scuse. Perdono, Signore, è una parola che dimentichiamo tanto.
Let's take a look now at what the Pope has been doing this week. So, on Tuesday, Pope Francis received a delegation from the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, Traditionally, the Patriarchate sends a delegation to Rome for the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. And also on Tuesday, Pope Francis celebrated the 65th anniversary of ordination of Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI. Now, there was no general audience on Wednesday. Those are actually on hold for the summer. But Pope Francis did celebrate Mass at the Vatican for the Feast of Saints Peter and Paul. During that Mass, all newly appointed metropolitan bishops received their pallium. Here's a look at that Mass and the reaction of one bishop.
La paura ci fa fermi, ci ferma sempre, ci chiude alle sorprese di Dio.
In general, with fear, we worry about, are we able to address the issues of the day? And how do we do that in a loving way? How do we stay faithful to our Catholic faith? And the Pope really models that for us. And as he speaks about going out into the peripheries, as he speaks about how important is just accompanying people, he teaches us how it is that we're able to relate. And when we have that opportunity to be, not only to offer support, but also to be supported by our people, by our flock, I think it's then that the fear dissipates.
La preghiera permette alla grazia di aprire una via di uscita, dalla chiusura all'apertura, dalla paura al coraggio, dalla tristezza alla gioia.
We know that the Lord can do great things when we open ourselves to His grace, when we place our hope in Him, and when we're willing to embrace even the surprises that come our way. And obviously fear is something that can keep us from doing that.
On Thursday, Pope Francis held a special Jubilee General Audience. The regular general audiences, of course, are on hiatus for the summer. Time to take a look now at the resignations and nominations that happened this week. So first up, Pope Francis accepted the resignation of the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Fuad Tual. He has not appointed a new patriarch, but for now, the Pope has named Father Pierbattista Pizzaballa as the apostolic administrator of the Patriarchate and elevated him to the rank of Archbishop. Now, if that name is familiar, it's because Father Pizzaballa was actually the custos of the Holy Land until this past April. As predicted, there were plans to bring him back to the region. Turning to Holy See diplomats, Archbishop Francis Assisi Chulikat has been named the new nuncio to Kyrgyzstan. He was previously the permanent observer to the United Nations in New York. Well, that's all for this edition of Vatican Connections, and that's all for this season. Now, this is also my last time hosting Vatican Connections with you. At the end of this summer, I will be moving on to new opportunities out west. I want to thank all of you viewers who have written in and emailed in for all of your support and feedback. It has meant a lot, and it has been touching and inspiring to know that I've been able to provide you with everything you want to know about what happens at the heart of the Church. Stay tuned to Salt and Light for more wonderful programming in the fall. From everyone here, and especially from myself, thank you so much for watching.